everyone. Thank you for being here with us. We're so excited to spend this time with you. We really want to thank you for allowing us to try our dry run of our live streaming with you. We're going to work out any kinks that come up, so be patient with us. I am Netta Whitaker, the Elementary Reading Coordinator, and this is Jan Keese, our District Consultant. We know there are a lot of misconceptions out there about guided reading. Some people are wondering, what is it? What is it not? So we're going to spend some time with you just really laying out those misconceptions. We're going to spend some time with you just really talking about those misconceptions and what to do during guided reading that will help you with your students. So I'm going to let Jan Keese get us started.
Okay, thank you. I started to say good morning. I guess it's good afternoon. I'm glad to have a little bit of time to talk with you about guided reading. Very passionate about guided reading because the research tells us there is nothing else that will move students forward as impactful as guided reading does. So we're going to take a little bit of time just to talk about that with you today. Again, as Netta said, we're trying to figure out the logistics of everything, so be patient. If something is or isn't working, we'll try to get it on board. But I want to talk about powerful instruction with guided reading. So we have an activity that we would like you to do. So with you, you have a couple of facilitators that are going to kind of guide this process. And what we would ask you to do is to brainstorm as a group, what would guided reading look like in a fifth grade classroom? What would be those key attributes? What would you want to see? What would you be looking for? What is the value of guided reading in fifth grade? So your facilitators are going to take 3 to 4 minutes, let you brainstorm a list, and then we're going to come back together. Oh, do I need to give directions? So,
They just now got the sound, so they can hear you now.
okay, so I might have said something profound and you missed it, so I'll try to repeat it. So as a group, we want to give you the opportunity to think about what guided reading would or should look like in a fifth grade classroom. So your facilitators that are there with you are going to chart out as you share ideas about those key components, the attributes of what guided reading should look like in a fifth grade classroom. We're going to give you 3 to 4 minutes to do that, and then we're going to come back together. So because I'm not with you, I don't know where you are in the process, but I hope you've had a chance to at least think about what guided reading could or should look like in a 5th grade classroom, and think about your own classrooms as you're doing that. So I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about what guided reading is, and just some clarification or affirmation if this is something that you were already thinking. The very first thing I want to point out is this is a time when you use your assessment data to make some decisions. You know, I'm sure you're aware that our K-2 teachers on all campuses have rolled out our assessment system and are in the process of doing that. We've trained some 3rd grade teachers. We'll be rolling out with 3rd, 4th, and 5th with the expectation that next fall we would be K-5. And so you do have data now, but that will be a more systemic kind of data that you would have. So we would use that data to identify the needs of students. You also then are grouping students based on not only the needs that the data shows you, but also an appropriate instructional level of text. When we're doing guided reading, we want students in a text that's not so easy for them that there are no challenges, but not so difficult for them that they are struggling. Sometimes, yes, you may group them for different purposes, but in general, that's what we think about. We want to engage students in the reading of authentic text, and by that, I mean actually having kids in books. You know, you are so fortunate as a district as you're rolling out your Fountas and Pinnell adoption, and as that continues to roll out and materials become available to you, you do have access to those books. So we want kids not just learning the strategies, but being able to apply them in those real authentic texts that also more closely mirrors what they're doing in their own independent reading time. And finally, we want to continually be monitoring our students. We want to regroup them. Our group should never be permanent. You know, we should regroup them based on additional data, maybe a focus of a lesson, maybe the type of text we're using, and so it needs to be fluid. Predominantly, it stays a lot the same, but it needs that ability to be fluid. So we're going to take just a moment and put this slide up and let you just glance at it again with those key points. Okay, we hope that you had a chance to kind of look through those things, and as I'm sharing these things, and in just a minute as Netta is continuing to share more thoughts with you, I hope you're continually asking yourself, how does this connect to what I do in my classroom, what I believe about my students, what I can do to support my students as learners and readers? Some things during guided reading, you absolutely, even though they are 5th graders, you want that word work, vocabulary work, you need to continually be connecting. Sometimes I think that we have it in our head that once these K-1-2 kids get phonics under the belt, we don't need to continue to do, we do not continue to need to do word work, if I can get that out. But we do, because we are getting increasingly difficult verbs, words, things they are connecting to, and so we need to be able to do that. I also, just 1 minute, you're in my way, I can't see. Thank you. Sorry, that was like a little practice thing. I have my little cheat sheet over here that I'm looking at while I'm talking to you. So also, you're using this specific strategy so students can apply it in their text. So when you're working on a strategy, and often I see that it's something you've done either modeled during a read aloud or an interactive reading, and you are continuing to support it in that small group instruction. And our greatest hope then is the strategies that we are using, that students will then apply them in their independent work. And so being very specific about those strategies. We also need to know how we're going to read the text. When they're with the group, when they go back to their seats, guided reading is not a time that we should hear or see round robin reading where each child is taking a turn reading. It's a time when every child should be engaged in the text completely. And so knowing, how you're going to go about reading it, how you're going to have them read when they go back to their seats. Because obviously at the 5th grade level, everything you read is not going to be together as a group. And finally then, applying the strategy work with the text. What are you working on? How are you going to apply it? We used to think that strategies had to be taught in such isolation. We've now learned teach the strategy and immediately apply it to real text to make that work. And so when you think about guided reading in these ways that I've just talked about, it's why it's so important that we know, even as 5th graders, the value in students being able to use this. So as I finish up my part here, Ned is going to take a little time and kind of continue thinking about that in relation to some of the things you've talked about with your new adoption, with Fountains and Pinnell, and making sure we make that strong case for guided reading.
Okay, now that you guys have had time to really process what guided reading is and talk about what it is not, and maybe work through some of those misconceptions, we're going to focus on why it's important. Why is guided reading so important, especially in the fifth grade classroom? Well, we know that our students in fifth grade are starting to encounter really sophisticated text. They have to have time to really process that text. Looking at this wheel in front of you, you have the wheel of strategic actions. This is everything that a reader must be able to do to understand text. As they encounter those texts, they're going to go through each one of these skills in one sitting. They have to be able to do that, and I'm going to give you time to really look at these things because it's really loaded in what a reader must be able to do to understand text. So take a few minutes and look at your wheel of strategic actions and think about what must a reader do to be able to really understand text, especially in a fifth grade classroom. Okay, now that you've had a few minutes just to think about that, I want you to think about how does guided reading really help those readers? If they're processing text and doing all of those actions when they encounter that text, guided reading will create those fluent, independent readers that you want. What you're able to do as a teacher is guide them through each of those actions as they encounter the text. You can hear them. It's almost like getting into their head where you can hear their thinking. You can hear where they have those things where they're going wrong and you can steer them back. That's why it's called guided reading. You're guiding them through that process so that when they go on and do it independently, they're able to be successful. I want to point out that this will help you on high stakes testing because if you're with the reader during guided reading and you're allowing them to practice all of those actions, when they encounter text independently, they'll be able to do it and then add that skill practice onto it. So what we're saying is guided reading in conjunction with those skills group will really create a reader who's ready to work on text independently and really flourish on those high stakes tests. So if you're watching them in that guided reading group and you see that they're struggling with something, you have time then to hone up those skills. You have time to push them forward so that when they encounter those long passages independently, they're ready for that work. Moving on to the next slide. Take a look at the guided reading and high stakes testing. Think about your students in your classroom. Do you feel comfortable with them? I'm sorry, I don't know where you are. Yes. Think about your students in your classroom. You have them in those guided reading groups, but at one point you have to let them go and allow them to really work on that test on their own independently. That's the goal of guided reading. I'm going to help you now at my small group table so that when you're doing that high stakes testing, you can transfer those skills. But if our students aren't allowed to process text and complete all of those actions, then they cannot apply that skill to a test when they're doing it independently. I want you to practice everything a student must do when they encounter text independently. Moving on to the next slide, look at the activity. You have on your table a small article and you have the wheel of strategic actions. I want you to take a few minutes to read that article. And as you're reading, you're going to check off everything you have to do that aligns with that wheel. Everything that you had to do to process that text, and you'll be able to see that you had to solve words, you had to monitor your own comprehension and go back and think about some things over and over. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to first read that article with your will right next to you, and you're going to check off everything you had to do as you process that text. Okay, guys, now you had time to put yourselves in the seat of your students and really see what they feel like as they encounter new text. It's really complicated, and you have to walk them through that process. So, the main purpose of this activity was to see what happens to my students when they encounter that really sophisticated text on their own, and what can I do as a teacher during guided reading to help guide them through all of the actions that they have on that strategic wheel when they're processing text. This will transfer over again to your high stakes testing, because if I can do it in guided reading and I can practice with you, then I can do it independently. Then we can add on that layer of skills that you guys are doing in skills groups. If they can process text, now we can apply the skill piece to it. I'm, n- I'm going to pass this back over to Jan to see if she has any closing statements for you, and then we'll reconvene in a few minutes.
Okay, so we know this was kind of a quick, fast, like overview of what Netta and I wanted to share with you about guided reading. We would give you a few minutes now with your facilitators in your space. If there are any questions that you want us to answer right now, if there's anything we've said that you need some clarification, we're going to give you only about a minute to generate those questions. They will get sent to us, and we will try to answer those as best we can. Again, thank you as we are trying to work out some of the kinks of how the live streaming is going to work in your district, how two people can do it together and communicate back and forth, and yet still communicate with our facilitators, with the people running the cameras, and everything else. So thank you for being patient with us, and we'll give you just a minute or two with your facilitators. Please share any questions you have, and Ned and I will do our best to address what we can at the moment, and if not, then definitely it's something that she will get back to at another time. Okay, Ned and I are going to tag team and take just a few minutes to try to address some of the questions that you have. So I'm going to talk about a couple of them, and then Netta can talk about a couple, and we'll trade off. So I'm going to start by the question came, how do you know what skills or strategies to work with on students? Absolutely. That is where your assessments are going to give you that information. Specifically right now with our pilot, and running records is a core piece that we're using, and you would have access to that. It will tell you, what are they missing? What is difficult for them? Are they able to read accurately? But beyond that, and probably at 5th grade level, you're really going to look at your rubrics and your comprehension piece. The rubrics with the assessment system are built on your TEKS and your district curriculum frameworks, and so right there gives you the things that you value in comprehension, and you will be able to see what students are able to do and not do. That is something that we are working on continually, is helping teachers know how to better look at the data, look at the results they have, and know how to transfer that into important and appropriate instruction. With that also, the other question I want to mention is, what are the other kids doing? And I'm going to say, as 5th grade, it is amazing and awesome because they are so capable of working independently. And I'm sure that you've talked about or you've heard people talk about those first 20 days or some variation of them that you might use as you set the stage for expectations in your classroom. Again, that is something we are focusing on with professional development. I know the ELA team here at the district office is working with the ALTs on that and continuing to give information. What are those appropriate things that are doing? What are your expectations? How are you going to monitor that? And, at the very least, students engaged in independent reading, students engaged in independent writing, following up from guided reading. Many times it's following up with a partner or individually with what you're doing with guided reading. But again, that is going to be the focus of part of our instruction as we continue on rolling out the assessments K-5. You want to address a couple?
I want to address the one that says, everything on the wheel says thinking. That's pretty tough, and you're right. Everything on the wheel does say thinking, and the reason for that is there are 3 levels of thinking we want our students to be able to accomplish. The first one is thinking within the text. Thinking within the text is very literal. You're looking at those print words, you're solving the words by action, you're monitoring your own comprehension and thinking, did I understand that word? Should I go back? And then you're thinking at things that happen that jump right off the page. Then you go on to thinking within the text. Now you're starting to make connections to yourself. It becomes more abstract for a reader, and this is where it becomes relevant to a reader. So that's 2 different levels of thinking, which leads all the way up to thinking beyond the text. This is where we really want our 5th graders to be. This is where they become very sophisticated. They're starting to criticize and analyze the author. Why did he make those choices? Were those the best choices? Would I have done something different if I had written this text? That's when we're reaching that higher level of thinking, and we want our readers to be able to do all of that. So yes, there's a lot of thinking, but it's very purposeful and it's layered. We're going to start with those very literal thinking, on to the more abstract, on to sophisticated thinking where we're judging that author and his choices. And there's another question that was about, do we teach the strategies over and over until they get it by second nature? Well, that's called a scaffold. So we definitely want to guide them and give them that strategy, and then we want to have them practice it on their own until it becomes second nature to them. If it's not working and our students aren't successful, we want to give them different strategies because there are different ways that they can approach these thinking skills. And I think Jan wants to add something on to that. Is that pretty much?
Actually, I've been getting the high sign that our time is up. Ned and I could talk to you on and on because we are so passionate about this, but time is up and we do want to honor your time. So Netta, come stand here. On behalf of Netta and I, we just thank you for your time and attention. Netta still will have your questions, and I know she and the ELA team will spend some time digging deeper and making sure that they have provided complete answers and suggestions. So thank you for your time, and I will let Netta close.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. This is just the first step in our work with you. You have Jen there, who's your campus support person. We're going to follow up with your questions and more support for you. We really want you to think about implications for your classroom. What do you need to be successful in starting your guided reading groups out? And that's where Jen and Megan and myself will start to help you guys. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time.